the cold steel of the blade pressed against Sloane's pulse point before she could even drop her mop. She was in the wrong room on the wrong floor, looking into the eyes of a man who hadn't touched a woman in 12 years, not since the last one died in his arms. In the underworld of Seoul, Ji-hoon Kong was a ghost, a lethal shadow who ruled with ice in his veins. By all laws of the Mafia, Sloane should have been dead before she could scream. But instead of drawing blood, the most feared man in Korea did something that signed both their death warrants. He lowered the knife. Welcome back. Today, we are diving into a story that proves the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon. It's a connection. Imagine being a broke, exhausted cleaner from Detroit, stranded in a city where you don't speak the language and your bank account is literally at zero. You're just trying to survive the night shift when you accidentally stumble into the private penthouse of a man who hasn't allowed a soul near him for over a decade. This is the story of Sloane and Ji-hoon. One is running from a past that broke her. The other is a king who built a fortress to ensure he'd never feel anything again. From a knife at the throat to a love that threatens to burn down an entire criminal empire, this is a journey of survival, possession, and the kind of loyalty that starts wars. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to get intense. Let's begin. The humidity of Seoul usually felt like a damp blanket, but inside the Sondo Grand Hotel, the air was filtered, chilled, and smelled of expensive lilies. For Sloane Williams, it smelled like a trap. Her hands were raw, the skin between her fingers stinging from the industrial-grade bleach she'd been using for the last 8 hours. At 29, Sloane's life was a masterclass in worst-case scenarios. 6 months ago, she was in Detroit, planning a summer wedding. 2 weeks before the dose, her fiancé, Curtis, emptied their joint savings. $47,000 intended for a house and a future, and vanished into thin air. He didn't just leave her. He left her with the debt, the shame, and a family that looked at her like she was the one who had failed. So she ran. She chose Seoul because it was the furthest point on the map where she could disappear. But disappearing was expensive. Floor 42. Never. Her supervisor, Mrs. Kong, had barked at her earlier that evening, pointing a gnarled finger toward the ceiling. You stay 28. You stay 30. Never 42. Sloane had nodded, too tired to argue. But at 3 a.m., after a double shift that left her eyes burning and her knees shaking, the universe decided to play a cruel joke. Sloane leaned her head against the cool metal of the service elevator, her finger drifting toward the G4 ground. But the elevator didn't go down. It jolted upward. Ding. The doors slid open to a hallway that didn't belong in a hotel. There were no numbered doors, no patterned carpets. The floor was dark, polished stone, and the walls were lined with traditional Korean ink paintings that seemed to watch her. Damn it, Sloane whispered, her voice cracking. She stepped out, thinking she could find the manual override button or a service staircase. The silence was heavy, vibrating with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. At the end of the hall was a door slightly ajar. A supply closet, she hoped. She needed a fresh pair of gloves. Hers had torn an hour ago. She pushed the door open. It wasn't a closet. It was a sprawling, minimalist sanctuary of black leather and glass. The city lights of Seoul glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, looking like fallen stars. In the center of the room stood a man. He was shirtless, his back to her. His skin was a map of violence. Extensive traditional tattoos of dragons and tigers spiraled down his spine, disappearing into the waistband of his black trousers. But it was the scars that caught her breath, jagged white lines that told stories of blades and bullets. Sloane froze. She should have turned and run, but her boots felt like they were glued to the floor. The man didn't turn around slowly. He moved like a predator, a blur of motion that ended with Sloane pinned against the doorframe. A knife, cold and impossibly sharp, was pressed firmly against her windpipe. "Who sent you?" the man hissed. His English was perfect, laced with an accent that was low and dangerous. Sloane's heart didn't just beat. It slammed against her ribs. She looked up into eyes that were devoid of warmth. This was Ji-hoon Kong. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his aura. He was the kind of man who didn't negotiate with life. He dictated it. I'm a cleaner, she gasped, the blade nipping the skin of her neck. Wrong floor. I'm sorry. Please. Ji-hoon's gaze traveled over her, taking in the faded blue uniform, the name tag that said Sloane, and the trembling raw hands she held up in surrender. He saw the exhaustion in her dark eyes, a weariness that matched the scars on his own body. For 12 years, Ji-hoon had lived by a single rule: eliminate the variable. Anyone who saw his face in his private space was a variable. But as he looked at this woman, this American stranger who looked like she was already carrying the weight of the world, the ice in his veins did something it hadn't done since the night his fiancée died. It thawed just a fraction. You're American, he noted, his voice dropping an octave. Detroit, she managed to choke out. I don't know who you are. I don't care. I just want to go home. You have no home, Ji-hoon said, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. He could see the displacement in her. He could smell the desperation. He didn't pull the knife away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his scent, sandalwood and expensive tobacco, filling her senses. If I let you walk out that door, you will talk. You will tell the other staff about the man on the 42nd floor with the tattoos and the glass palace. I won't, she sobbed, a single tear tracking down her cheek. I swear. I'm nobody. Nobody listens to me anyway. Ji-hoon watched the tear. He reached out with his free hand, his thumb catching the salt water before it could reach her jaw. His touch was unexpectedly warm, a startling contrast to the blade at her throat. A nobody from Detroit, he mused. He finally lowered the knife, though he didn't move out of her personal space. The problem, Sloane, is that nobodies are the most dangerous. They have nothing to lose. The adrenaline that had been keeping Sloane upright finally flickered out. The world tilted. The black marble floor rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she felt was a pair of strong tattooed arms that caught her before the darkness took her whole. When Sloane finally opened her eyes, she didn't see the flickering fluorescent lights of the hotel break room. Instead, she was staring at a ceiling of coffered silk, illuminated by the soft ambient glow of a city that never slept. The air was warm, warmer than she had felt in months, and carried the expensive, sharp scent of cedarwood. She tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea rolled through her. Stay still, a voice commanded. It was the same low baritone from the hallway, but the lethal edge had been replaced by a strange, clinical detachment. Sloane turned her head. Ji-hoon was sitting in a leather armchair across from her, now wearing a black silk robe that partially obscured the dragons on his skin. He was watching her with an intensity that made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. On the coffee table between them sat a bottle of high-end mineral water and a small plate of gimbap. You're in my private quarters, Ji-hoon said, his eyes never leaving hers. My physician has already been here. He said your body is shutting down from a combination of chronic exhaustion and severe malnutrition. When was the last time you ate a full meal, Sloane from Detroit? Sloane pulled the heavy wool blanket closer to her chest. She felt exposed, not because of her clothes, she was still in her rough cleaning uniform, but because this man was reading her life story through her physical failures. 2 days ago, she whispered. A protein bar I found in a vending machine. A muscle jumped in Ji-hoon's jaw. He stood up, his presence filling the room like a physical weight. He signaled to a man standing silently by the door. Min-ho, his most trusted enforcer. Min-ho, tell the kitchen to prepare something substantial. High protein, easy on the stomach. and get the paperwork started." "Paperwork, sir?" Minho asked, his voice betraying a hint of shock. "You mean the non-disclosure agreement or the disposal forms?" Ji-hoon turned to look at his man, his expression turning into a mask of ice. "Neither. I mean the employment contract. She's not going back to the cleaning crew." Sloane's heart skipped. "What are you talking about? I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone, I promise." Ji-hoon walked toward the bed, stopping just inches away. He leaned down, his face so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. "You stumbled onto the 42nd floor, Sloane. In my world, that usually earns you a one-way trip to the bottom of the Han River. My associates expect blood for a security breach of this magnitude. If you walk out that door now, you are a liability. And liabilities get removed." Sloane's breath hitched. "So you're kidnapping me?" "I'm offering you a choice," Ji-hoon corrected, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous whisper. "You can go back to the hostel in Itaewon, where you'll probably starve or be caught by immigration within the month. Or you can stay here. You will be my personal attendant. You will maintain this suite, you will handle my private affairs, and in return, you will be the most protected woman in Seoul." "Why?" Sloane asked, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me. You had a knife at my throat 5 minutes ago." Ji-hoon reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely caused by fear. "Because for 12 years I haven't let a single person into this space," he said, his voice raw with a sudden, unexpected honesty. "And yet, when you walked in, the first thing I noticed wasn't that you were a threat. It was as if you looked exactly how I feel." "And how is that?" "Hunted," he replied. He stood back up, regaining his composure. "Minho will handle the details. Your debt in America, the $47,000 your fiancé stole, is already being tracked. By tomorrow morning, it will be paid in full. Your visa will be legalized. You will have a name and a life again." Sloane stared at him, stunned. He had looked into her past during the time she was unconscious. He had dismantled her secrets before she even knew his name. "You're buying me," she whispered. "I'm investing in you," Ji-hoon countered. "Don't make me regret it. Eat. Sleep. Tomorrow your life as a servant ends. Your life as a shadow begins." As Ji-hoon walked out of the room, Sloane looked at the gimbap on the plate. She was terrified, trapped in a golden cage by a man who ruled an empire of blood. But as she took a bite of the food, the first real nourishment she'd had in weeks, she realized something even more terrifying. For the first time since she'd left Detroit, she felt safe. The first week on the 42nd floor felt like living inside a high-definition dream. Sloane's world had shrunk to the size of a 6,000-square-foot penthouse, but it was the most expansive her life had ever been. She no longer woke up to the smell of damp hostel blankets and cheap street food. She woke up to the silent, automated hum of floor-to-ceiling shades retracting to reveal the sprawling skyline of Seoul. Minho had been thorough. In her guest suite, a room larger than her entire childhood apartment in Detroit, Sloane found a wardrobe filled with silk loungewear, tailored trousers, and soft cashmere sweaters, all in muted tones of cream, charcoal, and black. "Mr. Kong prefers a certain aesthetic," Minho had told her with a polite, albeit stiff bow. "You are to be invisible when guests are present but impeccable when you are with him." Sloane's job was simple, yet strangely intimate. She handled the things the hotel staff wasn't allowed to touch. She organized Ji-hoon's private library, managed his eccentric diet of bitter green teas and high-protein meals, and ensured the penthouse remained a sanctuary of silence. But silence was a luxury in Ji-hoon's line of work. One evening, as Sloane was polishing the heavy crystal decanters in the lounge, The elevator chimed. 3 men stepped out, none of them wearing hotel uniforms. They wore sharp, dark suits and carried an aura of practiced violence. Ji-hoon emerged from his office, his presence instantly shifting the room's temperature. "The Jang Syndicate is moving on the docks," one of the men said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "They think because you haven't been seen in public for a month, you're getting soft, boss. They're targeting the shipping containers in Incheon." Ji-hoon didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the neon lights of the city, looking like a god of the underworld surveying his domain. "Let them move," Ji-hoon said, his voice a cold vibration. "Let them take the bait. When they think they've won, I want their entire operation scorched. No survivors. I want the message to be clear. I am not soft. I am merely selective about who I bleed." Sloane froze, a cloth still gripped in her hand. This was the man who had tucked a curl behind her ear and paid off her $47,000 debt. He was a monster, a king who spoke of massacres as if they were business mergers. The men bowed and retreated. Ji-hoon didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. "You find my methods distasteful, Sloane?" Sloane took a breath, trying to steady her hands. "I find them terrifying. You talk about people like they're just variables." Ji-hoon turned then. He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the obsidian floors. He stopped at the bar, pouring himself a finger of amber liquid. "In my world they are. If I am not the wolf, I am the sheep. And I buried the sheep 12 years ago." He looked at her, his eyes tracing the line of her throat where the faint mark of his knife had finally faded. "You're wondering if you're a variable too." "Am I?" she asked, her voice stronger than she felt. Ji-hoon stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, his fingers grazing the silk of her new sleeve. "Variables can be changed. You, Sloane, you are becoming a constant. You are the only thing in this city that doesn't want something from me. You just want to survive." "Is that why you kept me?" she whispered. "Because I'm the only person you don't have to kill?" Ji-hoon set his glass down. "I kept you because when I look at you, I don't see a victim. I see a mirror. We were both discarded by people who were supposed to protect us. The only difference is, I've already burned the bridges back to that life. You're still looking over your shoulder for Curtis." Sloane flinched at the mention of her ex. "He's gone. He took everything." "Not everything," Ji-hoon said, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. "He left the fire. He just didn't know how to handle the heat." Suddenly, Min-ho appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Boss, we have a problem. The security feed at the warehouse. We have a visual on Jang's lead scout." Min-ho handed a tablet to Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon looked at the screen, and for the first time, Sloane saw a flash of genuine bone-chilling rage cross his face. He turned the tablet toward Sloane. "Do you recognize him?" Sloane looked at the grainy CCTV footage. Her heart stopped. Standing among the rival Mafia enforcers, looking more well-fed and arrogant than he ever had in Detroit, was Curtis. "He's here," she gasped, her legs turning to jelly. "How is he here?" "The Jang Syndicate doesn't just hire muscle," Ji-hoon said, his voice dropping to a whisper that promised death. "They hire leverage. They knew I found someone. They didn't know I found someone." He looked at Sloane, his hand gripping her shoulder with a possessive strength. "The war has officially begun, Sloane. And your past just volunteered to be the first casualty." The image on the tablet burned into Sloane's retina. Curtis, the man who had whispered promises of forever in a cramped Detroit apartment, was now standing on Korean soil, flanked by men whose business was death. He looked different, his cheap hoodies replaced by an ill-fitting designer jacket, but the smug, opportunistic glint in his eyes remained the same. "How?" Sloane whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the penthouse's climate control. "How did he find me?" Ji-hoon took the tablet from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. He was no longer the calm, detached observer. A lethal energy radiated from him, the kind that made even the air in the room feel sharp. "Curtis didn't find you, Sloane," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "The Jang Syndicate found him. When I took you off the streets, I signaled to every predator in Seoul that I had a pulse again. They went looking for my pressure point. They found your history, traced your debt, and flew your problem halfway across the world to use as a leash." "He's going to tell them everything," she said, panic rising. "He'll tell them I'm nobody, that I have no value." "On the contrary," Ji-hoon interrupted, stepping into her space until she was forced to look up at him. "To them, you are the most valuable thing in this city. You are the only thing that makes Ji-hoon Kong hesitate. And Curtis? He's not here to rescue you. He's here to sell you back to me, one piece at a time." Min-ho cleared his throat, standing at a respectful distance. "Boss, the Jang has sent a formal invitation. A neutral meeting at the Incheon docks. They want to discuss a trade. They return the debtor, Curtis. And in exchange, they want the northern shipping routes. And they want the girl to witness the transaction." Sloane felt a cold shiver. A trade. She was being bartered like a commodity between a monster and a thief. "No," Ji-hoon said. The word was absolute, a finality that silenced the room. "We don't trade. We dominate. Min-ho, prepare the convoy. We're going to Incheon, but not for a meeting. We're going for a reclamation." He turned back to Sloane, his eyes softening just a fraction, the only crack in his armor. "You have a choice, Sloane. You can stay here, behind 3 inches of reinforced glass and a dozen armed guards. Or you can come with me and look the man who destroyed your life in the eye when I break him." Sloane looked at her raw, healing hands. She thought about the $47,000, the shame, and the cold night she spent crying on a hostel floor because of Curtis's greed. Then she looked at Ji-hoon, a man who was a villain to the world but had been a savior to her. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm tired of being the one who gets left behind." The drive to Incheon was a silent procession of black SUVs cutting through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul. Sloane sat in the back of the lead vehicle next to Ji-hoon. He didn't speak, but his hand rested heavily over hers on the leather seat. It wasn't just a gesture of comfort. It was a vow of possession. When they arrived at the docks, the air was thick with the smell of salt and rust. The Jang Syndicate was waiting. 30 men armed with submachine guns, standing beneath the skeletal shadows of giant shipping cranes. In the center of the circle, looking small and terrified despite his bravado, was Curtis. As Sloane stepped out of the car, Curtis's eyes widened. "Sloane. Sloane, baby. Tell them. Tell them you know me. These guys. They're crazy, Sloane. Tell this guy to give them what they want so we can go home." Sloane stood beside Ji-hoon, her heart hammering, but she didn't flinch. She looked at Curtis, the man she had almost married, and felt nothing. No love, no longing. Only a deep, visceral disgust. The leader of the Jang, a man with a scarred face known as Chairman Ko, stepped forward. "A beautiful girl, Ji-hoon. I see why you broke your 12-year fast. But is she worth the northern routes? Your ex-friend here says she's just a maid. A thief's leftovers." Ji-hoon stepped forward, the rain matting his dark hair. He didn't look at the guns pointed at his chest. He only looked at Chairman Ko. "You made 2 mistakes tonight, Ko," Ji-hoon said, his voice carrying over the crashing waves. First, you thought you could use my past to control me. Second, you assumed I care about shipping routes. Ji-hoon pulled a small remote from his pocket. I've already liquidated the northern assets. I burned the warehouses an hour ago. There is nothing to trade. Chairman Ko's face contorted with rage. Then you've signed her death warrant. Kill them all. Wait. Curtis screamed, scrambling backward. Sloan, help me. But before the Jang could pull their triggers, the darkness around the docks came alive. Red laser dots appeared on the foreheads of every Jang enforcer. Ji-hoon's snipers had been in position for hours. I didn't come to negotiate, Ko, Ji-hoon whispered, stepping in front of Sloan to shield her. I came to show my constant what happens when someone tries to dim her light. Fire, Ji-hoon commanded. The docks erupted into a symphony of silenced cracks and chaos. In the center of the storm, Sloan didn't look away. She watched as Ji-hoon's world, the world of blood and absolute loyalty, dismantled the ghosts of her past. The ride back from the Incheon docks was a blurred montage of rain hitting the bulletproof glass and the distant sirens of a city that had no idea how close it had come to a massacre. Inside the SUV, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't the cold silence of the week before. It was charged, electric, and thick with the scent of ozone and gunsmoke. Ji-hoon hadn't let go of Sloan's hand since they left the docks. His grip was tight, his knuckles white, as if he were afraid that the moment he released her, she would vanish back into the nightmare of her past. When they stepped back into the penthouse, the warmth of the interior felt alien. Ji-hoon stripped off his damp charcoal overcoat, tossing it onto a chair. He looked different. His hair was disheveled and a faint smear of blood, not his own, stained the cuff of his white shirt. Min-ho, Ji-hoon said, his voice raspy. Double the perimeter. No one enters this building. Not the manager, not the cleaning crews, no one. If a bird lands on the balcony, I want to know its heartbeat. Min-ho bowed and retreated, leaving them alone in the vast glass-walled living room. Sloan stood by the bar, her legs finally giving out. She sank into a stool, her breath coming in shallow hitches. You killed him, she whispered. She wasn't thinking of the Mafia soldiers. She was thinking of Curtis. She had watched him fall, the man who had been her entire world in Detroit, now just another body in a shipping yard. Ji-hoon walked toward her, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I removed a cancer, Sloan. He wasn't your past. He was a debt that needed to be settled. Does it haunt you? Sloan looked up at him, her dark eyes swimming with a complex cocktail of relief and grief for the woman she used to be. No. What haunts me is that I feel safe. After everything I saw tonight, I should be running from you. But I'm not. Ji-hoon reached out, his hand trembling slightly, a rare sign of vulnerability from a man who ruled with iron. He traced the line of her jaw, his touch lingering. 12 years ago, I loved a woman named Mi-young. She was gentle. She didn't belong in this world. My enemies took her because they knew she was my only soft spot. They tortured her for 3 days just to hear me beg. She died in these arms, her blood soaking into my skin. Sloan held her breath. The secret of his 12-year isolation was finally laid bare. I swore that night, Ji-hoon continued, his voice dropping to a low, pained vibration, that I would never give the world another target. I turned my heart into stone. I haven't touched another woman. I haven't let anyone close enough to smell my scent. I thought if I stayed cold, I stayed invincible. He stepped even closer, his shadow looming over her. And then a broke girl from Detroit walked into my room with bleach on her hands and fire in her eyes. You aren't gentle, Sloan. You're a survivor. And for the first time in a decade, I don't want to be invincible. I just want to be yours. Sloan reached up, her fingers grazing the silk of his shirt, feeling the frantic, powerful thud of his heart. They'll still come for us, won't they? The Jang. And whoever comes after them. Let them come, Ji-hoon whispered, his forehead leaning against hers. I spent 12 years building an empire to protect myself. I'll spend the rest of my life using it to protect you. He didn't wait for her to answer. He closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was desperate and hungry, a collision of two lonely souls who had finally found home in the middle of a war zone. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a reclamation. As they moved toward his bedroom, the inner sanctum he had never shared, Sloane realized the truth. Curtis had stolen her money, but Ji-hoon had given her something much more dangerous. A reason to stay. In the darkness of the master suite, the city lights below looked like a sea of diamonds. Ji-hoon pulled her close, his tattooed arms wrapping around her like a shield. No more cleaning other people's messes, Sloane, he murmured against her neck. From now on, the world cleans up after us. Outside, the rain turned to a light mist, but inside the obsidian tower, the fire was just beginning to burn. The penthouse was no longer a prison or a sanctuary. It had become a war room. For 3 days, Ji-hoon hadn't slept. He moved between banks of monitors and encrypted phone calls, his jaw perpetually tight. The hit at the docks had sent shockwaves through the Seoul underworld, but the expected retaliation from the Jang Syndicate hadn't come. They're too quiet, Ji-hoon muttered, staring at a digital map of the city's shipping districts. Chairman Ko is a cockroach, but he isn't a coward. If he isn't attacking from the outside, he's digging a tunnel from the inside. Sloane sat at the obsidian kitchen island, sipping a tea she had prepared for him. She had been watching the men who came and went, the lieutenants, the advisors, and the couriers. Back in Detroit, Sloane had learned to read people to survive the streets. Here, she realized, the stakes were higher, but the tells were the same. You're looking for a wolf, Ji-hoon, Sloane said softly. But you should be looking for the one who's trying too hard to be a sheep. Ji-hoon turned, his tired eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I've been helping my whole life, Sloane said, standing up. People don't see the Maid. They talk over us, they leave papers out, and they forget we have ears. Since we got back from Incheon, your lieutenant, Sang-woo, has stopped looking me in the eye. He used to be rude. He'd track mud on the floor just to watch me clean it. Now, he's polite. He's too polite. Ji-hoon's expression went cold. Sang-woo had been with him for 8 years. Sang-woo is family, Sloane. In Detroit, the people who called you family were the first ones to steal your rent money, she countered. Check his accounts. Check where he goes when he leaves the 42nd floor. Ji-hoon signaled to Min-ho, who was always lurking in the periphery. Do it. Discreetly. 2 hours later, the silence in the penthouse was shattered. Min-ho returned, his face like stone. He handed Ji-hoon a series of photographs and a bank statement. Sang-woo had been meeting with a high-level Jang operative in a basement gambling den in Gangnam. Worse, he had been offered a seat at the Jang table in exchange for the security codes to the 42nd floor. He was going to open the door tonight, Min-ho whispered. At 4 a.m., while you were scheduled to be in the gym. Ji-hoon didn't explode. He didn't scream. He simply looked at Sloane, a dark newfound respect shining in his eyes. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small, sleek obsidian-handled handgun. He didn't hand it to her, but he set it on the table between them. You saved my life today, Sloane, he said, his voice a low, lethal purr. The invisible girl just took down a traitor who's been in my inner circle for nearly a decade. What are you going to do? Sloane asked, her heart racing. I'm going to let him open the door, Ji-hoon replied. But he won't find a sleeping boss. He'll find a firing squad. And I want you in the safe room, Sloane. This part gets loud. No, Sloane said, surprising herself. She thought about the $47,000, about Curtis, and about the bleach-burned skin on her hands. She was done being the girl who hid in the closet while the men decided her fate. I want to see it. I want them to know that the woman they called the Maid is the reason they failed. At 3:55 a.m., the penthouse was bathed in shadows. Sloane stood in the darkened gallery, her hand resting on the hilt of the ornamental dagger Ji-hoon had given her for protection. The elevator chimed, a sound that should have been impossible without Ji-hoon's clearance. The doors slid open, and Sang-woo stepped out, followed by 4 Jang assassins. They moved with professional silence, black masks obscuring their faces. Sang-woo pointed toward Ji-hoon's bedroom. He's in there. Do it quickly. I want the girl kept alive. Chairman Ko wants her as a trophy. Suddenly, the lights flooded the room, blinding the intruders. Ji-hoon was sitting in the center of the lounge, perched on the back of a sofa, a submachine gun resting casually across his lap. Min-ho and 6 other loyalists stepped out from behind the pillars, their weapons already leveled. Looking for me, Sang-woo? Ji-hoon asked, his voice like the crack of a whip. Sang-woo froze, his face draining of color. Boss. I was checking the perimeter. You were selling the keys to my house, Ji-hoon interrupted. He stood up, his presence colossal. He didn't look at the assassins. He looked at his traitorous brother. You told them Sloane was a trophy. You were wrong. She's the one who caught you. Ji-hoon stepped aside, revealing Sloane standing in the light. The look of pure agonizing shock on Sang-woo's face was the most satisfying thing Sloane had ever seen. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a player in the game. Kill them, Ji-hoon commanded. As the room erupted into chaos, Ji-hoon reached for Sloane, pulling her behind the reinforced marble bar. He shielded her body with his own, his heartbeat steady against her back. When the silence returned, the 42nd floor was reclaimed. Ji-hoon stood up, stepping over the fallen, and turned to Sloane. He reached out, wiping a speck of dust from her cheek with a surprisingly gentle thumb. You have the instincts of a queen, Sloane Williams, he whispered. Maybe it's time we stopped calling you an attendant and started calling you a partner. The cleansing of the penthouse after Sang-woo's betrayal took only an hour, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. The Maid was dead. In her place was a woman who had outsmarted a seasoned lieutenant. Ji-hoon spent the morning on the phone, his voice a low, lethal hum. He wasn't just managing his territory anymore. He was preparing a debut. Tonight is the autumn solstice gala at the Shilla, Ji-hoon said, walking into the dining room where Sloane was staring at the city. He wasn't wearing his usual silk robe. He was in a tailored 3-piece suit that made him look like a lethal aristocrat. Every family and soul will be there. The Jang, the Choi, and the Lee. They all think you are my weakness, Sloane. They think you are a secret I'm hiding because I'm ashamed or afraid. He walked up behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. I want to show them they're wrong. I want to show them you are my strength. You want me to go to a Mafia gala? Sloane asked, her heart hammering. Ji-hoon, I'm a girl from Detroit who was scrubbing your floors last week. I don't know how to navigate a room full of killers in tuxedos. You survived, Curtis. You survived a blizzard. You survived an assassination attempt in this very room. Ji-hoon whispered into her ear. The women in that room have never known a day of hunger or a moment of true fear. You have more power in your pinky finger than they have in their entire bloodlines. He signaled to Min-ho, who entered carrying a long velvet-covered box. Inside was a dress that looked like it had been spun from midnight. a deep, shimmering obsidian silk with a high slit and a backless design that would perfectly frame the scars of her past and the strength of her present. Beside it lay a necklace of black diamonds that looked like drops of frozen ink. "Wear it," Ji-hoon commanded softly. "Claim the room before they can claim you." The Shilla Hotel was a fortress of luxury. As the black SUV pulled up to the entrance, the paparazzi and the underworld lookouts went silent. The door opened, and Ji-hoon stepped out, looking every bit the king of Seoul. But when he reached back into the car and offered his hand to Sloane, the collective intake of breath was audible. Sloane stepped out, her natural curls styled into a regal crown, her skin glowing against the black silk. She didn't look down. She didn't look afraid. She walked with her head high, her hand tucked firmly into the crook of Ji-hoon's arm. As they entered the ballroom, the sea of elite criminals parted. Chairman Ko of the Jang Syndicate was standing at the far end of the room, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He had expected to hear news of Ji-hoon's death this morning. Instead, he was seeing the man he tried to destroy walking toward him with the woman he tried to kidnap. Ji-hoon didn't stop until they were standing directly in front of Ko. The music seemed to fade into the background. "Chairman Ko," Ji-hoon said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "I believe you've met my personal attendant. But I don't believe I've formally introduced my partner." He shifted, his hand moving to the small of Sloane's back, pulling her flesh against him. "This is Sloane Williams. She is the eyes of my house and the keeper of my seal. If any of you speak her name, you speak it with the same reverence you use for mine. Because the next person who tries to touch her won't just face a gun, they will face the complete and total annihilation of everything they love." Sloane looked Chairman Ko directly in the eye. "I heard you wanted me as a trophy, Chairman," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I think you'll find I'm much better at being a hunter." The room was paralyzed. It was a formal claiming, a declaration that Sloane was off limits. But in the corner of her eye, Sloane saw something that Ji-hoon missed. A waiter moving too fast, his hand reaching not for a tray, but for the small of his back. "Ji-hoon," she gasped, shoving him sideways just as a silenced pop rang out. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the ballroom as Ji-hoon's men drew their weapons. But the shooter wasn't a waiter. He was a distraction. "The balcony!" Minho roared. A second team of Jang assassins dropped from the rafters, their targets clear. They weren't going for Ji-hoon. They were going for Sloane. In the swirl of black silk and flying glass, Ji-hoon grabbed a silver platter from a nearby table, using it as a shield as he pulled Sloane toward the exit. He was a whirlwind of violence, firing his suppressed handgun with surgical precision while keeping his body positioned between Sloane and the danger. "They're desperate," Ji-hoon shouted over the gunfire. "Ko knows he's lost. This is a suicide mission." They reached the service corridor, but Chairman Ko was already there, holding a detonator in his shaking hand. "If I can't have the northern routes and I can't have the girl, then nobody leaves this hotel." Ko screamed, his eyes bloodshot. Sloane looked at the detonator, then at Ji-hoon. She realized that Ko wasn't just a rival. He was a man who had lost everything and wanted to take the world with him. "Ji-hoon, the chandelier." Sloane pointed up. The massive crystal fixture was held by a single heavy cable near Ko. Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. He took the shot. The cable snapped, and tons of crystal and steel came crashing down. The impact didn't kill Ko, but the shockwave knocked the detonator from his hand. Sloane lunged forward, sliding across the polished floor to grab the device before Ko's men could reach it. She stood up, her black dress torn at the hem, her eyes blazing. "The party's over, Chairman," she said, holding the detonator high. Ji-hoon walked up behind her, his gun leveled at Ko's forehead. He didn't look at the fallen chairman. He looked at Sloane, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. "I told you," Ji-hoon whispered, loud enough for the surviving guests to hear. "She isn't a trophy. She's the dragon." The aftermath of the Shilla Gala was a blur of high-level cleanups. Chairman Ko was in custody, not of the police, but of Ji-hoon's men, and the Jang Syndicate was effectively headless. But as Sloane stood in the penthouse the next morning, nursing a coffee and watching the sunrise, she didn't feel like a victor. She felt like a woman standing on a tightrope. The elevator chimed, but it wasn't the rhythmic stride of Ji-hoon or the stiff march of Min-ho. It was a sharp military click of heels. Two men in charcoal suits and a woman with a high-and-tight bun stepped out. They didn't look like the Mafia. They looked like the government. "Sloane Williams?" the woman asked, flashing a badge that made Sloane's stomach drop. "U.S. Embassy. Office of Special Investigations." Ji-hoon stepped out of his office, his eyes instantly turning into shards of flint. He didn't say a word, but he moved to stand directly behind Sloane, his hand resting possessively on the nape of her neck. "Mr. Kong," the agent said, her voice clipped. "I'm Agent Sarah Miller. We've been tracking a person of interest named Curtis Mitchell. We found what was left of him at the Incheon docks. We also found his flight records, which were paid for by a shell company linked to you." She turned her gaze back to Sloane. "Sloane, we know about the debt in Detroit. We know about the visa adjustments made on your behalf. We're here to offer you a way out. We can fly you back to the States today. Full immunity for your illegal work status, a witness protection placement, and a chance to put all of this violence behind you." The room went deathly silent. Sloane felt Ji-hoon's fingers tighten almost imperceptibly against her skin. He was giving her the choice he had promised, the safe option. "And if I stay?" Sloane asked. Agent Miller looked at Ji-hoon with professional loathing. "Then you are an associate of a major criminal enterprise. When we eventually move on to the Kong organization, and we will, you'll be swept up in the net. You're a smart woman, Sloane. Don't let Stockholm Syndrome dictate your life." Sloane looked at the agent, then she turned to look at Ji-hoon. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't threatening. He was simply waiting, his face a mask of regal stone. He was willing to let her go if it meant she was safe. "You think I'm a victim," Sloane said, turning back to the agents. "You see a black woman from Detroit and a powerful Korean man, and you've already written the script. You think I'm being held here, aren't you?" Miller asked. "I spent 29 years being a victim in America," Sloane said, her voice rising with a newfound authority. "I was a victim when my fiancé robbed me. I was a victim when the banks took my home. I was a victim when I was scrubbing floors for $10 an hour under the table. Nobody from the embassy came to save me then." She stepped forward, out of Ji-hoon's shadow but closer to his side. "Ji-hoon Kong didn't find me and make me a victim. He found me and gave me the tools to never be one again. My debt is paid. My visa is legal. And for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible." "Sloane, think about what you're saying," Miller warned. "He's a murderer." "He's a protector," Sloane countered. "And if you're looking for Curtis Mitchell, don't look at Ji-hoon. Look at the Jang Syndicate. They're the ones who brought a con artist into a war zone. Now, if you don't have a warrant for my arrest, I'd like you to leave my home." The agents lingered, the tension thick enough to draw blood. Finally, Miller tucked her badge away. "We'll be watching, Sloane. When the walls close in, don't say we didn't offer a hand." When the elevator doors closed, Sloane felt the air leave her lungs. She turned to Ji-hoon, expecting him to be relieved. Instead, he looked haunted. "You should have taken it," he whispered. "Is that what you want?" she asked. Ji-hoon pulled her into him, burying his face in her hair. I want you to live. Every day you stay with me, your life is a gamble. The embassy. They won't stop. The other families. They won't stop. Then we don't stop either, Sloane said, pulling back to look him in the eye. I'm not a maid anymore, Ji-hoon. I'm a partner. And if the walls are closing in, then we just have to build a bigger house. Ji-hoon looked at her, and for the first time a genuine beautiful smile broke across his face. The kind of smile that didn't belong to a mafia boss but to a man in love. Min-ho. Ji-hoon called out. Min-ho appeared instantly. Yes, boss. The embassy wants to play games, Ji-hoon said, his eyes flashing with a renewed fire. Move all offshore assets to the Singapore accounts. And get the architect on the phone. Sloane wants to build. But as they shared a moment of triumph, a final shadow was moving. Deep in the heart of a high-security prison, a man who had survived the chandelier's fall was making one last phone call. Chairman Ko wasn't finished. He had one card left to play, and it was a card that would force Ji-hoon and Sloane into a final lethal confrontation. The final blow didn't come from a gun or a blade. It came from a betrayal of the system. Chairman Ko, even from his high-security cell, had one remaining asset: the chief of police. On the final night of the lunar month, a coordinated raid was launched. But it wasn't the Jiang Syndicate coming for the 42nd floor. It was a corrupt SWAT team, acting on falsified evidence that Ji-hoon was planning a citywide terror attack. They aren't coming to arrest us, Min-ho said, checking the tactical feed as black vans swarmed the hotel entrance. They've been given shoot-to-kill orders. Ko is burning the city down just to take you with him, boss. Ji-hoon stood in the center of the penthouse, his face a mask of absolute calm. He looked at Sloane. She was wearing her tactical gear, a sleek black vest over her clothes, with the obsidian-handled gun tucked into her holster. Sloane, Ji-hoon said, his voice softer than the chaos outside. The service tunnel leads to the subway. Min-ho will take you. Once you're in the crowd, the embassy won't be able to track you. Go to Singapore. The accounts are in your name. Sloane walked up to him, her eyes fierce. You're doing it again. You're trying to be the martyr so I can be the survivor. I told you in Detroit, I'm done running. This isn't a mafia war, Sloane. This is the state. Then let's show the state what happens when they try to evict a dragon, she countered. The elevator doors hissed open. The first wave of corrupt officers burst through, flashbangs blinding the room. But Ji-hoon and Sloane weren't in the center. They were in the rafters, the service catwalks he had installed for just this moment. The gunfight was a symphony of precision. Sloane moved with the fluid grace she had learned in the last few months, providing cover fire for Ji-hoon as he dismantled the tactical team's formation. She wasn't just a maid. She was the architect of their defense. The server room. Sloane shouted over the noise. If we can broadcast the footage of Ko meeting with the chief, the legal part of this raid dies. While Ji-hoon held the line at the main doors, a silhouette of tattooed fury and lead, Sloane sprinted toward the terminal. Her fingers, once raw from bleach, now flew across the keys. She had the login credentials Sang-woo had inadvertently left in his hidden files. Upload complete. Every news station in Seoul, every social media feed, and every honest precinct in the city suddenly flickered to life with a video of Chairman Ko handing a suitcase of cash to the chief of police, explicitly ordering the execution of Ji-hoon Kong and the American girl. The effect was instantaneous. Outside, the sirens changed tone. The real authorities, alerted by the massive digital leak, were descending to arrest the corrupt officers. The 42nd floor went quiet. The remaining hit squad, realizing their cover was blown and their paymaster was finished, surrendered. Ji-hoon walked toward Sloane, his breath heavy, his shirt torn. He looked at the screen, then at the woman who had just dismantled a decade of corruption with a single enter key. He didn't say a word. He simply dropped his weapon and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like iron and victory. Epilogue. 6 months later. The 42nd floor was no longer a secret. It was a legend. The Kong organization had gone legitimate, transitioning into a global security and logistics firm, though everyone knew that the peace and soul was kept by the shadow of the dragon. Sloane stood on the balcony, her dark curls caught in the warm summer breeze. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform or tactical gear. She wore a tailored white suit, a diamond-encrusted dragon pendant resting against her chest. Ji-hoon stepped out behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. He looked younger. The tension that had defined him for 12 years finally eased. The Detroit investigators called. Ji-hoon murmured against her ear. They recovered another 10,000 from Curtis's hidden accounts. They want to know where to send the check. Sloane smiled, leaning back into his strength. Tell them to donate it to the Detroit Women's Shelter. I don't need his money anymore. I have my own empire to run. Ji-hoon laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Our empire, Sloane. She turned in his arms, looking into the eyes of the man who had found her in the dark and taught her how to burn. I walked into this room by mistake, Ji-hoon. But I'm staying here by choice. And I, Ji-hoon whispered, kissing her brow, have finally stopped waiting for the world to end. Because with you, it's only just beginning. As the sun set over a peaceful soul, the girl from Detroit and the Mafia boss stood at the top of the world. They were no longer victims of their past or prisoners of their scars. They were the constants in an ever-changing world. The Black Maid was gone. The Queen of Soul had arrived. And that, family, is the end of Sloane and Ji-hoon's journey. From the streets of Detroit to the highest throne in Korea, they proved that love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone willing to go to war for you. If you loved this story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We have plenty more stories of survival, passion, and the dangerous men who protect the women the world forgot. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment? The dockfight, the gala, or the final digital takedown? Thanks for watching Helen Romance Library. Remember, the darkest nights always lead to the most powerful rains. See you in the next story.